Welcome, dear traveler of the heart. You've just arrived at a quiet shore where nothing is asked of you. No striving, no roles to play, no masks to wear. This is the empty boat. Here, we don't sail to arrive anywhere. We simply drift in the silence between words, in the space between thoughts. Each story you're about to hear is not meant to teach, but to invite, not to explain, but to awaken something already inside you, soft, ancient, and still breathing beneath the noise. Let your shoulders drop. Let your breath return to its own rhythm. You're safe here. You don't need to change. You only need to listen slowly. These are not just stories. They are lanterns on the path, mirrors in the fog, whispers from the mountains of Zen. They carry the fragrance of old temples, the hush of bamboo groves, the wisdom of those who once walked barefoot across time. So, close your eyes, if you wish, or gaze softly into the dark. This is the empty boat, and you are already home. Now let us begin with the first story, The Sound of Falling Leaves. Story 1. The Sound of Falling Leaves. The whisper before autumn. The sky was the colour of quiet stone. It had rained the night before, and the leaves on the path were damp, fragrant, and already beginning to fall. Not many, just enough to notice, like memories, like small things we once held but can no longer name. An old monk named Ryokan sat cross-legged outside his hermitage, which leaned into a pine-covered slope as if it were listening. The hut was made of cedar and thyme. He'd built it with his own hands many seasons ago, never quite finished it, and he liked it that way. He was sipping tea, warm and silent, when he saw a figure approaching. A young man from the village below, face flushed not from exertion, but from something that had been burning inside him for too long. Without a bow or greeting, the young man blurted, "Master, my life is in chaos. I try to plan everything, fix everything, control everyone, but it keeps falling apart. I can't sleep. I can't breathe. Teach me how to control it. Please." Ryokan looked at him for a long moment, then said nothing. Instead, he turned his gaze back to the path, where a single maple leaf, golden and trembling, loosened from the branch and fell soundlessly to the earth. He nodded toward it. "Did the leaf resist the wind?" he asked softly. The willow and the wind. They sat together, for a while without speaking. Ryokan poured tea into a small ceramic cup, cracked, stained, and deeply beloved. When the tea steam rose and curled into the air, the old monk began a story. "Once," he said, "there was a mighty pine tree that stood tall at the edge of a cliff. It looked down on a soft, weeping willow by the river and mocked its flexibility. 'You are weak,' said the pine. 'You bend to every breeze.' But one winter, a storm came with wind like a furious god. The pine stood stiff, unyielding. It refused to bow. The wind snapped it at its base. Meanwhile, the willow bent low, letting the wind pass through its long hair, its trunk supple and open. It lived because it did not fight." Ryokan sipped his tea. "Tell me," he said, "which one had more strength?" The young man said nothing. His jaw clenched, but his eyes began to soften. A teaching from the Buddha Ryokan's voice dropped to almost a whisper. In the Dhammapada, the Buddha says, "Just as a solid rock is not shaken by the storm, even so, the wise are not affected by praise or blame." But the rock the Buddha speaks of is not made of stone. It is made of letting go. We think strength is resistance. But in Zen, strength is spaciousness. Not to push life away, but to let it pass through us, like wind through bamboo. You cannot hold the river still with your hands, but you can sit beside it and listen. The young man lowered his gaze, ashamed perhaps that he had come seeking control, and found an invitation to surrender. But something in him heard the deeper music, the inner storm. We live in a time obsessed with control. We try to schedule peace, hack happiness, perfect our mornings, control our partners, predict the future. And when things slip, we panic. But anxiety, at its root, is often the refusal to let life unfold. It's the mind's desperate grip on the illusion of stability, a mind that says, if I do everything right, nothing will go wrong. A lie we tell ourselves to feel safe. But life is wind, not stone. We cannot stop autumn from coming. We cannot stop people from leaving, or the body from aging, or the heart from breaking. What we can do, what we must do, is learn to bow. Breathe. Pause. Let the leaf fall. The psychological truth here is simple. The more we resist uncertainty, the more we suffer, the more we grasp for control, the more control controls us. Letting go is not a spiritual cliché. It's nervous system repair. It's the act of loosening our jaw, softening our belly, and trusting the deeper intelligence that animates all things. A meditation to close as dusk painted the forest in silver light. The young man stood. He bowed now, not out of ritual, but out of something quieter, something real. Master, he said, if I stop trying to control, what remains? Ryokan smiled. Presence, he said, and peace. He picked up the fallen leaf and placed it gently in the young man's hand. This leaf did not fight. Gravity, he said, and now it nourishes the earth. Like the moon reflected in water, the mind becomes clear when it does not cling. So tonight, dear listener, I ask only this. When you feel the storm rising, when your mind begins to grasp, when your breath turns shallow, pause. Listen for the sound of falling leaves. Let one fall in your heart and let it go. Story 2. The Empty Teacup. Rain on the stepsit had been raining since morning. The temple stone steps were slick with moss, glistening in the pale light like jade veins. Inside the tea room, everything was still, except the sound of drops falling from the roof edge into a copper bowl with patient rhythm. Tap, tap, tap. An old Zen master, Hakuin, sat before the hearth. He held no scrolls, no beads, just a steaming teacup cradled in both hands, as if the warmth was an offering. A young scholar came to visit him that day, eager, polished, carrying the scent of freshly printed sutras and the weight of his own mind. He bowed as formality demanded, and sat, though his spine never quite softened. Master, he said quickly, I have read all the sutras of the middle path, the Four Noble Truths, the Visuddhimagga, and the Lankavatara. I have studied Abhidhamma, the Pali Canon, and the great commentaries of Nagarjuna. Now I am ready to receive your teaching. The master poured tea into the scholar's cup. It filled halfway, then to the brim, and then began to spill. The young man flinched. It's full. Stop. The master smiled. You are like this cup, he said. How can I offer anything if you are already full? The parable of the cup. The scholar blinked, confused. I don't understand. I've prepared so much. I've come with everything I know. Hakuin gestured to the overflowing cup, now dripping onto the wooden floor. Exactly. Then, gently, he wiped the spilled tea with his sleeve and said, "Let me tell you something. In a quiet village by the mountains, there lived an old potter who shaped clay into bowls that sang when you ran your finger around their rim. Travelers came from far away to buy his work. One day, a rich man came to the potter's hut, demanding to be shown the finest piece. 'I have gold to pay,' he said. 'I want your best bowl.' The potter picked up a misshapen, slightly cracked bowl. 'This one,' he said. The man scowled. 'But it's imperfect.' The potter replied, 'Exactly. It is empty enough to sing.' The young scholar stared at the teacup, and something in his breath loosened. The Dharma in silence. The Buddha once said, "As rain falls on a house with a broken roof, passion enters a mind unguarded. But also, just as a clean cloth takes dye well, a mind free of self-conceit absorbs the Dhamma. A mind that is full of itself, of certainty, of pride in what it knows, cannot receive anything new." Zen is not about accumulation. It is about subtraction. Not about knowing more, but becoming less. In the Zen tradition, a true student is not one who arrives with answers, but with space. To understand the way, one must first forget the map. The master teaches not through filling the student, but by helping them unfill. Psychology of the full mind. In the modern world, we often live with cups overflowing with facts, news, noise, analysis, goals, urgency. We seek more knowledge, more frameworks, more certainty, believing that the more we know, the safer we are. But often, we are not drinking from the cup. We are drowning in it. When anxiety spikes or we spiral into rumination, it's usually not from lack of data, but too much thinking, too many layers between us and presence. Psychologists call this cognitive overload. Buddhists call it ignorance dressed as intellect. The practice of Zen, like trauma therapy, like somatic healing, asks us to return to the body, to the breath, to the bowl before it was filled. We heal when we empty, not through force, but through awareness. Try this. The next time you feel overwhelmed, say softly to yourself, "I am too full." Then place a hand on your belly and breathe. Let the exhale be the act of pouring out, the reflection before the flame. That evening, as the rain softened to mist, the young scholar did not ask more questions. He sat with the master in silence. No more doctrines, no more citations, just the sound of boiling water and the rhythm of breath. Then the master said, "Your wisdom is not what you carry in your head. It is the space between your thoughts." He added, "The Buddha did not teach truth. He invited us to listen when all else is gone. So tonight, as the sky folds into sleep, ask yourself, where is my mind too full? What might I receive if I let something go?" Close your eyes. Picture a cup. Let each exhale be a drop, falling away. And in the emptiness that remains, may peace find its way back to you. Story 3. Under the moon, nothing stays. The stillness between shadows. The moon hung low above the trees, like an old monk's lantern, casting silver shadows that stretched across the sleeping earth. The air was cold, but not cruel. Everything was waiting. In a clearing behind the monastery, Ryokan, the same quiet monk who once taught the lesson of the falling leaves, stood barefoot on dew-wet grass. His robe fluttered gently in the wind, worn thin by time and simplicity. In his hand, a rice paper lantern, its flickering light competing with the vast moonlight above. A novice stood beside him, young, anxious, always counting things, steps, chance, hours, regrets. He had come to Ryokan in tears earlier that evening. "Master," he whispered, voice trembling, "I don't know how to keep going. I try to hold on to peace, to happiness, but it never stays. I feel fine one moment, then a single thought, a memory, a fear, and it all dissolves. Am I broken?" Ryokan simply pointed to the moon. "What do you see?" The boy replied, "A full moon, bright, unmoving." Ryokan nodded, then walked to the still pond at the center of the clearing. "And here?" he asked, pointing to the reflection trembling on the surface. The boy tilted his head. "It's the same moon, but it shifts with the water." Ryokan looked into the boy's eyes. "So it is with your mind." The moon and the reflection, as they sat together beside the pond, Ryokan began to speak, not as one who teaches, but as one who remembers. "There was once a woman named Kana who lost her husband in a war. She came to the temple every night, offering incense, seeking comfort in prayer. One night, as she sat alone by the river, the full moon rose, round and glowing. She whispered, 'Let me never forget this peace.' But clouds gathered, and the moon disappeared. She wept, thinking peace had gone. Just then, an old nun passed by and said softly, 'Child, the moon is still there. Only clouds pass.' Kana looked up, stunned, and for the first time she stopped praying for peace to stay and started learning how to see through clouds. Ryokan's voice softened like wind in grass. 'Happiness is not the moon,' he said. 'It is your ability to see the moon, even when hidden.' 3. The Buddha on change impermanence, anicca, is one of the 3 marks of existence in Buddhist teaching. The Buddha spoke often of how everything conditioned must change. All compounded things are impermanent. Strive with diligence. We cling to moments as if they were stones. But life is water. Even the moon waxes and wanes. Even joy breathes in and out. To suffer, the Buddha taught, is not in the change itself, but in our refusal to let go. When we demand that peace stay, or happiness not fade, or love not shift, we suffer. But when we bow to impermanence as the law of life, we awaken a deeper kind of peace. Not the peace that avoids the storm, but the peace that sees the storm as passing cloud, modern suffering, and the illusion of permanence. In today's world, we are conditioned to chase permanence. We try to lock in happiness by controlling relationships, accumulating wealth, capturing moments in photos, building identities on platforms. We edit ourselves into versions that must stay lovable, successful, understood. But nothing stays, and in that truth lies both our greatest grief and our greatest liberation. Psychologically, the more we fight impermanence, the more anxious we become. We dread change. We panic when feelings shift. We hold on to relationships that have passed their time. We fear the silence after a song. But healing begins when we look at the moon, not in the sky, but in the water. The moon has not changed. Only the surface trembles. Therapists often teach emotional tolerance, the ability to feel without clinging or fleeing. In Buddhism, it is called equanimity, the spaciousness of mind that welcomes all things as guests, knowing none will stay. When we allow change without panic, we grow. The lantern and the letting go. The novice monk stared at the pond. "I keep waiting for the mind to settle," he said, "but it keeps moving." Ryokan smiled and set the paper lantern onto the water. "Let it move," he said. The lantern drifted out, bobbing gently, its light shimmering in rhythm with the ripples. "The moon does not scold the water," Ryokan said. "It simply waits to be seen again." Then he added, "You are not the clouds. You are the sky that holds them." As you listen to these words tonight, I invite you to ask, what am I clinging to that I need to let pass? What clouds am I confusing for the sky? What fear of change is keeping me from peace? Let go of the need to hold it all still. Close your eyes. Imagine the moonlight falling through your breath. Say gently, "This too shall pass." And say more gently still, "And that is okay." Story 4. The Monk and the Mirror. A face in the water. Before sunrise, the world is neither night nor day. It was in this hour of hush, when shadows do not yet know their shape, that a monk named Jinen sat before an old bronze mirror. The mirror had no decoration, no frame of gold, only time and rust at the edges. Its surface was slightly warped, worn down by years of silent reflection. Jinen did not use it to fix his robes, nor examine his skin. He used it each morning to ask one question: who am I today when I am not pretending? The monastery was silent around him. Others were still sleeping or meditating in darkness. But Jinen had long since found that some truths can only be heard in the hour when the world forgets its stories. He breathed in and looked again, not at his face, but through it. A memory returned, one of a time when he too came running from the world. The visitor with two faces. Years ago, when Jinen had just arrived at the monastery gates, he had not come seeking peace. He had come seeking escape. He had been successful in the world, wealthy, eloquent, praised, but inwardly torn, haunted, and unable to sleep without the hum of noise or the presence of someone who distracted him from himself. He had worn many faces: the kind boss, the charming friend, the good son, but none of them felt true. None of them stayed when the lights dimmed. He once confessed to the abbot, "I don't know who I am. I just know I'm tired of pretending." The abbot brought him a mirror, not a sermon, not a scroll, just a small mirror placed in his room. "Look," the abbot said, "until what you see no longer frightens you." For months, Jinen resisted. He would glance at the mirror and feel shame, anger, discomfort. He wanted to meditate past it, to study, to chant, to do anything but face himself. But slowly, like water dripping on stone, something softened. He began to sit before the mirror, without judgment. Some days his face was clouded with sadness. Some days open like a child's. Some days numb, but he kept sitting. And one morning, he smiled. Not because he saw perfection, but because he saw a face that no longer needed to hide. The Zen of seeing clearly the Buddha once taught, seeing things as they truly are, is the beginning of wisdom. But in Zen, this does not mean intellectual understanding. It means direct perception, a naked, unfiltered awareness of the present moment and the self within it. In ancient Zen koans, a disciple is asked, "Who were you before your parents were born?" The question is not meant to be answered. It is meant to be dissolved, to shake loose the identity built on labels, history, personality, even memory. When we strip away the layers of self-image, what remains? Not emptiness as in void, but emptiness as in openness. A self not fixed, but flowing, just like the mirror. A true mirror reflects everything without clinging. It shows joy without grabbing it, pain without rejecting it. It does not decorate, distort, or dramatize. It just reveals. Zen practice, at its heart, is learning to be such a mirror. Modern faces, hidden wounds today, we wear more faces than ever. We curate ourselves on screens. We perform our best moments. We edit pain into digestible quotes and call it healing. And yet, we are lonelier, more anxious, and more lost than perhaps any other time in history. Why? Because we've forgotten how to sit with what's true. Many of us live in self-alienation, where the inner experience and outer presentation are disconnected. We smile while grieving. We say, "I'm fine," when we're falling apart. We don't lie to others as much as we lie to ourselves. Psychologically, this gap creates suffering. It leads to what therapists call disintegration, a state in which we are fragmented, unwhole. Healing then begins not in changing who we are, but in meeting who we are, gently, honestly, without performance. The mirror does not fix, it reflects, and in reflection, something begins to realign. In trauma therapy, we call it reintegration. In Zen, we call it returning to the face before the mask, the mirror after the flame. As Jinan aged, he no longer needed the bronze mirror every morning, but he kept it close, not as a ritual, but as a friend. One evening, a young monk came to him, troubled, restless. "Master," he said, "how do I know if I'm becoming enlightened?" Jinan smiled and handed him the old mirror. "First," he said, "see yourself, entirely, without flattery or fear. Then," he added, "let even that face fall away." So tonight, as you return to yourself, I ask, what mask have you been wearing out of fear? What part of your face have you hidden from the light? When was the last time you sat with your own reflection without needing to change it? Close your eyes. Breathe in as if you are returning home. And imagine this: a mirror, quiet, still, showing only what is already enough. Story 5. When the bell stops ringing. After the sound in a mountain monastery cradled by mist and old stones, there stood a bell tower. It was simple, wooden, weathered by seasons, but the bell it held was beloved. It did not ring often, only at dawn and dusk, and each time it did, the sound would roll down the valleys like a ripple over still water. The villagers below said the bell had its own soul. Each morning, a young monk named Tenzin was tasked with striking it. He would rise in the dark, bow to the east, and pull the hemp rope once, no more. The bell would sing, deep and slow, and then fall silent. But that silence was the part Tenzin struggled with. He would stand there afterward, restless. The sound had moved through him like warmth, like presence. But when it faded, he felt hollow, empty, as if something had been taken. He asked the elder monk one day, "Why does the bell move me so deeply, only to leave me with silence?" The elder smiled. "It's not the bell that moves you," he said. "It's what awakens after the sound is gone." The koan of the bell that evening, the elder shared a koan, one of the ancient Zen riddles that cannot be solved by logic alone. He said, a student asked the master, "What is Zen?" The master struck the bell once. The student listened. Then the master asked, "What remains when the bell stops?" Tenzin blinked, waiting for the answer. The elder chuckled. "That's the koan," he said. You must sit with it. So, Tenzin did. He began waking even earlier, sitting beside the bell before dawn, listening not only to the ringing, but to the stillness that followed. At first, it made him uneasy. He wanted the echo to linger, to give him something. But slowly, something shifted. One morning, after striking the bell, he closed his eyes and felt the echo dissolve into the sky. And for the first time, instead of reaching for it, he rested inside the silence it left behind. And he wept, not from sadness, but from recognition. The teaching of emptiness. The Buddha taught, form is emptiness, and emptiness is form. In the Heart Sutra, this phrase is repeated like a mantra, mysterious and exacting. But what does it mean when the bell rings? We are moved by its form, the sound, the vibration, the tone. But that sound only exists in relation to its ending. What gives it beauty is not its noise, but the space it awakens. In Zen, we are reminded, silence is not the absence of something, it is the presence of everything. When we practice meditation, we are not trying to hear more. We are learning to hear what remains after sound ends. That is where truth lives, not in the note, but in the space that allowed it to arise. The modern mind and the fear of silence. Today, we live in a world afraid of silence. We fill every pause with distraction, music, scrolling, chatter, noise. We carry earbuds not as luxury, but as armor. Even in conversation, we speak to respond, not to listen. Why? Because silence strips away our defenses. It leaves us exposed, and inside that stillness, we might hear the parts of ourselves we have neglected. But healing requires silence. Therapists call it holding space, sitting with someone without rushing, to fix, interpret, or speak. Just being there. In trauma healing, silence is safety. In Zen, silence is the original language. In your own life, you may find that the most powerful truths arise not during the noise, but after it ends. A loved one leaves, a career changes, a belief breaks, and there is silence, not absence, but presence, waiting for you to listen. The ringing that stays one day, after many seasons had passed. Tenzin struck the bell at dusk. The sound rang, as always, across the fields. But this time he did not wait for it to end. He bowed to the silence, as if it were the sound itself. The elder monk came and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You have heard it now," he said. Tenzin asked quietly, "What did I hear?" The elder replied, "You heard what does not ring, yet is never silent. So tonight, dear listener, let me ask, when the noise fades, what remains in you? When the bell stops, can you still feel the vibration? When the words end, can you meet the space they leave behind? Close your eyes, breathe gently, and if the mind feels restless in the quiet, do not rush to fill it. Instead, listen. There is a bell inside you. Let it ring. Then let it go. Story 6. The bamboo bends. The storm that came in a small mountain village, nestled between hills of jade and cloud, there once stood a bamboo grove that whispered even when there was no wind. The people said the grove was alive, not with spirits, but with memory. It had witnessed hundreds of storms and still it stood. A boy named Akio grew up near that grove. He loved to run between the stalks, barefoot, laughing as the bamboo swayed around him like tall, playful monks. His grandmother would sit at the edge, weaving baskets and humming old songs. One summer, the sky darkened early. Clouds rolled in, like angry waves, and the wind rose with a howl. Trees twisted, branches broke, tiles flew from rooftops. Akio, now a young man, watched as chaos whipped through the village. The next morning, the streets were littered with broken limbs of old trees. One mighty oak, rooted for decades, had been split down the center. But the bamboo, still standing. Bent, not broken. Akio walked to the grove and sat, as he had not done in years. His grandmother, now frail but steady, joined him. "You see," she said softly, "the bamboo bows. That is its strength." Psh. The bamboo and the blade. Later that year, Akio left the village to study in the city. He studied hard. He worked harder. He spoke with sharp logic and kept his posture firm. In meetings, he didn't bend. In conversations, he didn't pause. In arguments, he didn't yield. He rose quickly, respected, even feared. But inwardly, he was tired, stiff, brittle. When his relationship collapsed, he didn't cry. When his father died, he gave the eulogy without emotion. He stood tall, always. Until one evening, alone in his apartment, a single moment, small, almost meaningless, broke him. A glass fell. It shattered. He fell to his knees and wept without sound. For the first time, he bent, and in that bending, something within him softened, cracked open, not in weakness, but in relief. He remembered the bamboo, and he returned home. Zen and the wisdom of yielding, the Buddha taught, just as a boy. Flood carries away a sleeping village. So too does anger or pride carry away the one who is unmindful. But Zen does not ask us to become passive. It asks us to become responsive rather than reactive, supple rather than rigid. Bamboo has no armor, no bark, no spikes. Yet it survives storms that split stone. Its secret. Flexibility. In Zen, true strength is not in domination, but in fluidity, to bend without breaking, to yield without losing center, to move with life, not against it. The great Zen masters were never stern statues. They were wind, water, laughter, silence. They bowed, they breathed, they flowed. The modern illusion of control in the modern world, we are taught to be like steel, to stand our ground, never show weakness, be unshakable. We clench our jaws, hold our breath, harden our hearts, and yet steel rusts, glass shatters. Only the flexible endures. Psychologists today speak of emotional resilience, the capacity to feel deeply, adapt quickly, and stay grounded. Not by resisting emotion, but by allowing it to move through us. Suppressed grief becomes illness, repressed anger becomes numbness, unbent sorrow becomes silence that suffocates. Healing is not found in rigidity, but in surrender, in admitting, yes, this hurts. Yes, I am human. Yes, I bend today. And that is okay. Return to the grove. Akio returned to the village. His grandmother had passed, but the grove still whispered. He stepped between the bamboo once again, now older, slower. He walked barefoot, letting the earth remind him. And when the wind came that evening, gentle at first, then strong, he stood in the middle and let his body sway. Not resist, not collapse, but move. He placed a hand on one stalk, feeling its pulse, and whispered, "Thank you." The oak resists and breaks, he remembered, but the bamboo bows and returns. So tonight, dear listener, if life feels like a storm, if grief has pulled you low, if change is asking you to yield, remember this: you are not here to remain unshaken. You are here to remain alive. Close your eyes. Feel your spine. Where is it locked? What emotion might you allow, just a little, to pass through? Breathe in, and with your exhale, bend, just enough to remain whole. Story 7. One step, one breath. The journey that never left. The road wound through the forest like a quiet thought. It was neither long nor short, neither steep nor flat. It simply was. Each stone in its path had been worn smooth by centuries of pilgrim feet. Monks, farmers, poets, and wanderers had all passed this way, their stories swallowed gently by the wind. This morning, it was Sora's turn. A monk in his middle years, Sora walked not with urgency, but with attention. He wore his robes not for display, but because they reminded him to listen. Every morning, he walked this same path, from the temple gate to a small moss-covered shrine half a mile away. It wasn't far, but he treated it as a sacred journey. One step, one breath. That was his vow. No planning, no reminiscing, no drifting into thought. Just this foot, then the next. Just this breath, then the next. And in this way, Sora had come farther than he ever had before. The novice and the pebble one day, a young novice named Koji joined him at first. Koji walked with great enthusiasm, eyes darting to the birds, lips moving silently in chant. But before long, he began asking questions. "Master, how can I stay focused? My mind keeps wandering. How can I reach peace? When will I know I'm doing it right?" Sora paused, pointed at the path. "Step," he said. Koji looked down, took a step. "Breath," Sora said next. Koji breathed. They continued in silence. But soon, Koji spoke again. "I think I understand the idea." Sora held up a hand, picked up a small pebble, held it out. "This pebble," he said, "knows no idea, but it is exactly here." He let it drop. Be like the pebble. The Zen of presence, the Buddha, taught. The past is already gone. The future is not yet here. There is only one moment for you to live. That moment is now. But what is now? In Zen, now is not a concept. It is not something you understand. It is something you enter through the body, through attention, through practice. Walking meditation, kinhin, is one of the oldest Zen practices. You walk slowly, feeling each footfall. You inhale with one step, exhale with the next. You let the mind settle into the rhythm of the body, not escaping into story, but returning to this simple reality. This is not escapism. This is re-entry into the only place where life happens, here. The modern pace and the forgotten breath today, we move fast, too fast. We walk while texting. We eat while scrolling. We breathe while rushing. Our feet are here, but our mind is miles away, replaying the past, rehearsing the future. This dislocation between body and mind is what modern psychology calls dissociation, a drifting from the present that numbs sensation and severs awareness. But even a few conscious breaths a day can begin to repair this split. Even one slow walk, without music, without urgency, can begin to return you to yourself. You do not need to climb mountains to awaken. You only need to feel your feet on the ground, to breathe like it matters, to walk like the path is sacred, because it is. At the shrine gate Sora and Koji arrived at the moss-covered shrine. The novice looked around, confused. That's it. We're here. Sora nodded, smiling. We've been here the whole time. Koji furrowed his brow. But I thought there would be a teaching. Sora touched his own chest, then the ground, then the sky. Every step was the teaching, he said. Every breath was the scripture. Then he turned to Koji and whispered, You've never left the way. You only stopped noticing it. So tonight, if your mind is tired from running, if you've been chasing peace like a destination, if your breath has become something you only remember when anxious, I invite you to return. Place one hand on your chest. Feel it rise, feel it fall, then stand if you can and walk. Slowly. One step, one breath. And let that be enough. Story 8. The bird that sang just once. The morning song, it happened only once. A sound so clear, so sudden, it stopped the entire valley. It came not from the sky, but from the low branches of an old persimmon tree that bent slightly toward the stream. A single note. Perfect, unrehearsed, irretrievable. It was the song of a bird no one had seen before, and no one would see again. An old farmer named Hitoshi was the only one truly listening when it happened. He had been kneeling in the soil, tending to sprouts when the note pierced the air. He looked up, heart suddenly still. The bird flew away moments later, its feathers dark against the golden dawn. No one else noticed, no one else heard. But for Hitoshi, that note echoed through his life like a bell inside a dream. Not because of what it said, but because of how it felt. Alive, unrehearsed, gone. The monk who waited. Years later, Hitoshi told the story to a monk passing through town. The monk's name was Shone. He carried nothing but a thin walking stick, a canvas, bag, and eyes that smiled even when his lips didn't. I can't stop thinking about it, Hitoshi said. It was the most beautiful sound I've ever heard. I wish I could hear it again. The monk sat beside him in the shade, listened quietly, then asked, Would it still be beautiful if it happened every morning? Hitoshi blinked. Of course, the monk raised an eyebrow. Even if it came at the same time, in the same tree, with the same note? Hitoshi paused. I don't know. The monk smiled. That bird's song was not beautiful because it was perfect. It was beautiful because it happened once. He added, the song and its silence are one thing. 3. The Buddha on impermanence and wonder in the Udana. The Buddha says, This life is like a drop of dew on a blade of grass, fleeting and fragile, gone with the rising sun. But it is precisely this fragility that gives life its sacredness. If we were guaranteed eternal joy, we would not recognize joy. If beauty were predictable, it would become wallpaper. The song is only moving because it ends. Zen does not ask us to cling to experiences. It asks us to bow to them, to receive each one like a guest that may never return. A smile, a breath, a moment of stillness, a note sung only once. This is anicca, impermanence, not as tragedy, but as miracle. The modern habit of missing things. In the modern world, we have cultivated a dangerous expectation, repeatable joy. We take photos of sunsets to remember. We replay songs until they numb us. We revisit places hoping to feel the same. We text someone again just to recreate a moment already past. But reality does not repeat. And when we demand that it does, we suffer. This is what psychologists call hedonic adaptation, the brain's tendency to normalize pleasure until it no longer satisfies. But Zen teaches us to become new with the moment, rather than asking the moment to be new for us. When we stop chasing the repetition of past beauty, we begin to notice the quiet miracles already here. The breath, the breeze, the sound of your own footsteps on morning grass, the echo that remains before the monk. Shun left. He gifted Hitoshi a small bell carved from old iron. He said, "Ring this only once, never twice. And each time you do it for something unrepeatable." Hitoshi obeyed. Years passed. He rang it when his daughter was born, when his wife laughed in her sleep, when his hands first trembled with age, and when the bell rusted beyond sound. He hung it in the persimmon tree, where once the bird had sung. "Not everything needs to be remembered," he whispered, "to have mattered." So tonight, dear listener, let me ask, what single moment still echoes in you? What fleeting joy did you try to capture instead of receive? What would it mean to live without needing to repeat beauty? Close your eyes. Let go of the camera. Listen for the bird song inside your own silence. Even if it comes only once, let it be enough. Story 9. No path, no arrival. The road that went nowhere. There was once a monk named Daishi who walked every morning with a map tucked inside his sleeve. Not a literal map. His monastery had only 2 buildings and a gravel path between them, but a map of the mind, a list of things he must become, stages he must pass, awakenings he must reach. He had drawn it over years of study. First, silence, then clarity, then no self, then enlightenment. And so, each day, Daishi walked the path. From the temple gate to the farthest cedar tree, eyes steady, back straight, thoughts measured. He walked not to arrive, but to improve. Until one day the old abbot watched him from the garden and called out gently, "Where are you going, Daishi?" The monk replied, "To the end of the path, master." The abbot laughed. "Ah, then be careful. That path has no end." Daishi frowned. "But I must reach awakening." The abbot nodded slowly. "Yes, but if you are walking to reach something, you have already passed it." 2. The man who built steps to the sky. That night, Daishi could not sleep. His mind clung to the words like thorns. Hadn't the Buddha himself walked for years? Hadn't all the great masters followed stages of purification, concentration, insight? Wasn't progress the goal? But in the hush of pre-dawn, something in him softened. He remembered a story once told to him as a child. There was a man who built a ladder to touch the moon. He climbed for years, convinced he would one day reach it. But when he finally looked down, he saw the earth was already shining beneath his feet. He hadn't needed a ladder. He'd only needed to look. And for the first time in years, Daishi left his map on the pillow. He walked outside, without purpose, without direction, just his feet, the gravel, and the night. Zen and the end of seeking. The Buddha once said, "You cannot travel the path until you become the path." In Zen, this is the great unlearning, the end of pilgrimage as escape, the realization that we do not walk toward awakening, we walk from it. The practice is not about getting somewhere. It is about being fully here, even when here feels messy, raw, ordinary. In the words of Dogen, to study the way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be awakened by all things. There is no next level, no final arrival, only this breath, only this step. The path is not the gravel underfoot. It is the attention in your body as you walk. The modern obsession with becoming. In our world, we are taught to chase versions of ourselves. We set goals for peace, design timelines for happiness, and optimize even our healing journeys. We treat awakening like a finish line. Spirituality becomes another ladder, and we keep asking, am I there yet? But peace is not a destination. It is the absence of striving. Modern psychology now mirrors this truth. Therapists speak of radical acceptance, the act of releasing the constant self-improvement loop and allowing this moment, this self, to simply be. You do not need to become someone else to be free. You need only to stop leaving yourself. The moment you rest in what is, without needing more, the search ends, and in its place, stillness. A walk without arriving. Daishi began walking differently after that night. He no longer timed his steps, no longer measured progress. He stopped trying to breathe perfectly. Instead, he began to notice the way his foot struck the earth, the way the wind moved through the robe, the way his heart sometimes tightened with doubt, then softened with compassion. And, slowly, the path he had walked for years, between the same trees, the same stones, began to feel new. Not because it had changed, but because he was no longer walking to arrive. He was walking to walk. When you realize there is no path, he whispered to the wind, each step becomes home. So tonight, dear listener, if you have been chasing peace like a distant star, if you have been striving to become whole, to become calm, to become awakened, let me offer this. What if you stopped walking? What if you stood still and noticed you were already here? Close your eyes. Feel your body. Let this breath be the temple. You are not lost. You are not behind. You are simply already here. Story 10. The fire inside the snow. The snow that burned winter came early that year. The temple, nestled deep in the northern hills, was draped in white silence. The paths disappeared under soft snow, and even the bamboo grove bowed beneath. The weight of stillness. Inside the meditation hall, a small fire crackled. Orange flames danced behind the shoji screen, and a faint smell of pine smoke lingered like a memory that hadn't quite left. A monk named Genjo sat alone, wrapped in his robe, knees aching slightly from the cold floor. His face was calm, but his chest burned, not with fever, not with longing, with anger. Earlier that day, another monk had insulted him, subtly, skillfully, publicly, and Genjo, who prided himself on composure, had not responded. He had bowed, he had smiled, but inside, the flame had sparked, and now it flickered still. Beneath his breath, behind his ribs, he stared out at the snow, untouched and clean. How can it be so peaceful, he whispered, while I am not? The master and the coal. That night, Genjo approached the abbot, an old man named Kinen who looked as if he had been carved from mountain stone, weathered, still, and unexpectedly warm. Master, Genjo said quietly, I am angry. Kinen nodded, waited. I didn't act on it, Genjo continued. I kept my silence, but it's still burning inside. Kinen leaned forward and handed him a piece of black coal from the hearth. Carry this with you, he said, but don't let it burn your robe. Genjo hesitated, confused. For how long? Kinen replied, until you understand. So Genjo tucked the coal in a pouch, tied it to his belt, and left. Days passed. The coal left a stain, a smell, a mark. Every time Genjo meditated, he could feel its presence. Eventually he returned. I think I understand, he said. Kinen looked up. I may have not thrown the coal, Genjo said, but I still chose to carry it. Thou 3, the Buddha on anger and embers. The Buddha once said, holding on to anger is like grasping a hot coal with the intent of throwing it at someone else. You are the one who gets burned. Anger is not evil. It is not shameful, but it is fire. And fire must be known to be managed. In Zen, we do not seek to destroy emotion. We seek to see it clearly, its arising, its movement, its illusion of necessity. To be angry and unaware is suffering. To be angry and awake is the beginning of freedom. Just as snow falls without asking your permission, emotions arrive unannounced, but it is what we do with them, cling, deny, project, that determines whether we freeze or melt. The psychology of contained heat, modern psychology, echoes this truth. When anger is repressed, it calcifies into resentment, fatigue, even illness. When it explodes, it harms others and ourselves. But when it is witnessed, named, and held with awareness, it transforms. Anger often hides sorrow. Rage often masks fear. Fire is not inherently destructive. It can also warm, protect, purify. Therapists call this emotional integration, the process of making space for all parts of the self without judgment. In mindfulness practice, we are taught to say, I see you, anger. You are here. You may stay for now, but you do not drive. And in that stance, the flame no longer consumes, it illuminates. The thawing of the ice, that winter passed slowly. The snow did not vanish in a single day, but melted inch by inch, warmth rising not from the sky, but from within the earth. So, it was with Genjo. He kept the coal not as punishment, but as reminder. Not that he had failed, but that he had awakened. He now greeted anger like an old traveller, offering tea but not a bed. And when he passed the monk who had once insulted him, he did not smile to hide his pain. He smiled because he had no more need to hide. There is fire in me, he thought, but it no longer burns what I love. So tonight, dear listener, if something inside you smoulders, if you are carrying a coal not yet thrown, if you are frozen in silence but burning beneath, I invite you to pause. Close your eyes. Feel the heat, not to fear it, but to know it. Ask, gently, what does this anger wish to protect? What grief lies beneath its flame? Let your breath be snow. Let your awareness be wind. And let the fire become light. Story 11. The Rice Bowl That Broke. The bowl and the follet was a simple bowl, pale celadon, with a faint crackle glaze, shaped decades ago by the hands of a nameless artisan. It had no markings of distinction, no gold, no inscriptions, no ornament. But to the old nun Junsei, it was priceless, not because of its form, because it had been her mother's. She used it each morning for her rice, just a handful, carefully rinsed, steamed over cedar wood. When the bowl warmed in her palms, it felt like memory, something gentle, something lost. But one morning, it slipped. There was no warning, no tremor, no noise outside, just a misjudged motion and a soft sound, tock, crack. The bowl broke into 3 pieces, quietly, almost respectfully. Junsei froze. then knelt, then wept. Not because she was attached to things, she told herself, but because she had lost what remained of someone she loved. The bowl had survived war, famine, storms, and yet now, in this still morning, it was gone. The broken thing that teaches a fellow nun named Michi entered silently, having heard the sound. She sat beside Junsei and waited. After a while, Michi asked, "Will you repair it?" Junsei nodded, slowly. "I will try." Michi reached into her robe and pulled out a small pouch of powdered gold. "For kintsugi," she said. Junsei blinked. "I thought that was for valuable pieces." Michi smiled. "It is." They worked for days, grinding lacquer, mixing with gold, painting along the cracks. When the bowl was whole again, its fractures glowed in soft light, like rivers through a valley. Junsei held it and whispered, "It was not perfect before, but now it is honest." 3. The Dharma of fracture in the Samyutta Nikaya, the Buddha teaches. All conditioned things are of a nature to break. Let this be known and accepted. Zen does not ask us to avoid sorrow. It asks us to meet it without resistance. Pain is not failure. Loss is not punishment. Cracks are not weakness. They are the opening through which truth arrives. The practice is not to keep everything intact. It is to see what remains worthy when it breaks. Kintsugi, the Japanese art of repairing. Pottery with gold is not a denial of damage. It is a celebration of transformation. The cracks are not hidden. They are highlighted. This is Zen. This is the way. Psychology of loss and integration. In modern psychology, healing from grief is not about moving on. It is about rebuilding a new relationship with what was lost, honoring its presence in the absence and allowing it to become part of us differently. Trauma, too, is not about getting over it. It is about integration, weaving the wound into the tapestry of the self so that it no longer defines us, but refines us. We are all cracked bowls, and yet, in mindfulness, therapy, spiritual practice, we learn to hold ourselves differently, with gentleness, with reverence, with gold made from breath. You do not become beautiful because you never broke. You become beautiful because you learned how to remain open after breaking. The table, the light, the offering. Junsei placed the repaired bowl on the altar the next morning, not out of sentiment, but as offering. She filled it with rice and whispered a verse. Even this holds, even this carries, even this shines. A young novice asked her, "Why keep a broken bowl?" Junsei answered, "Because it reminds me that nothing I love is ever truly lost." Then she added, almost to herself, "Every morning I eat from the hands of grief, and I am fed." So tonight, dear listener, if you are holding something broken, a memory, a relationship, a version of yourself, if something once whole has now become fragments, do not rush to discard it. Hold the pieces, trace their edges. Ask, what gold might I mix with this pain? What story might I tell that begins with the breaking, not ends there? Close, your eyes. Breathe slowly and know. Even cracked bowls can carry light. Story 12. Sleeping beneath the Bodhi tree. The dream that found him. The boy's name was Annan. He was 12 years old, thin and wide-eyed, with a head freshly shaved and questions that never seemed to stop. He had arrived at the monastery only a few months earlier, quiet at first, then restless. He was not like the others. He fidgeted during sitting meditation. He forgot his mantras. He once fell asleep in the middle of a walking meditation and wandered off the path entirely. But the Old monks loved him because when he asked questions, he did not ask from pride. He asked from wonder. One evening, during the rains retreat, the monks allowed the novices to sleep beneath the open stars. It was warm that night, and Anand chose a spot beneath the oldest tree in the garden, a broad, leafy descendant of the original Ficus religiosa tree said to have sheltered the Buddha himself. He lay there, palms on his chest, staring up into a web of leaves and moonlight, and as he drifted into sleep, he whispered aloud, "Buddha, do you dream?" 2. The dream. Beneath the tree. That night, Anand dreamed he was sitting beneath a vast tree whose roots cradled the earth and whose branches touched stars. The moon was full, but not white. It was gold, and across from him sat a man in simple robes, eyes half closed, hands resting gently in his lap. The man did not speak, but his presence spoke of mountains, of rivers, of every silence Anand had ever feared and slowly begun to trust. In the dream, Anand asked him, "How did you become awake?" The man opened his eyes. They were neither young nor old. "I stopped trying to wake up," he said. Then, "I stopped trying to be anything other than the one who was already here." Anand blinked. "That's it," the man smiled. "That's everything." The Buddha. On awakening, in the Majjhima Nikaya, the Buddha says, "I was asleep, like the rest of the world. Then I sat beneath a tree and refused to rise until I saw clearly." But what he saw was not a secret teaching, not a lightning bolt. What he saw was this world as it is, not as we imagine it. He saw that suffering comes from clinging, that peace arises from presence, that awakening is not something to acquire, but something to uncover. Zen reminds us, the lotus blooms from mud, not from escaping it. We do not become enlightened. We stop moving away from what is already whole. The modern sleep and the return to presence. In our world, most of us are not physically asleep, but spiritually, we dream our way through life. We dream of who we should become. We dream of futures that might finally make us worthy. We numb ourselves with distractions and call it rest. But sleep without awareness is not rest, and dreams without grounding become despair. Mindfulness is the act of waking up within the dream. Modern psychology now uses this same language. Therapists speak of reorientation to reality, the slow, gentle process of returning from dissociation, from emotional absence, from the haze of too much pain. In Zen, we say, don't seek the truth, just stop cherishing opinions. And in that, stopping, we return. The morning light, through leaves Anand woke with a leaf on his forehead. The sun was rising, and the tree above him shone with dew. He sat up slowly, feeling different. Not because something had changed, but because he had noticed it more deeply. He bowed to the tree. He whispered, "Thank you." From that day forward, he stopped asking for teachings he could memorize. He began asking only, "Where is the Buddha in this moment?" And often, he found the answer in the simplest things. A warm bowl of rice, the shadow of a dragonfly, the ache in his knees after meditation. The Buddha does not live in books. He would later say, he sleeps beneath the tree of your breath. So tonight, dear listener, if you are weary, if you've been trying too hard to awaken, to improve, to fix, may I offer this. Stop, lay down, let yourself rest beneath the tree of this very moment. No more searching, no more effort, just the breath, just the stillness. And if, in that stillness, a voice within you whispers, "You're already home," believe it. Story. 13. Clouds do not block the sky. The day the sky disappeared. At the base of Mount Kureha, there was a small village where the sky was worshipped, not in temples, not with incense, but with silence. Every morning, the villagers would step outside, bow slightly toward the east, and observe the sky, its hue, its clouds, its changing breath. It had become a ritual not of devotion, but of attention, and then, for 3 days, the sky vanished. Not literally, but to the villagers, it felt that way. Thick clouds rolled in, grey, heavy, unmoving. Rain fell steadily, not in storms, but in sorrow. The mountains blurred. The fields turned to mud. Even the birds grew quiet. A young girl named Kana began to worry. "Will the sky come back?" she asked her grandfather, who was once a monk. He knelt beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "The sky never left," he said. "It's just hidden." "But what if it stays hidden forever?" He smiled softly. "Even then," he said, "the sky is still the sky." The mirror. Above that evening, as Kana sat at the window, her grandfather brought her a bowl of water. He set it beside her on the wooden floor and waited. After a moment, he said, "Look." She peered into the water. The surface was still. Her face stared back. Then he stirred the water with a twig, and her reflection disappeared. Broken. Scattered. She looked up, confused. "The sky is like this," he said. "Sometimes the mind stirs, and we think the sky is gone. But it's just the reflection that changed. The real sky, unchanged, vast, calm, remains." She stared at the ripples as they slowly settled, and for the first time that day, she smiled. The Buddha on Mind and Clouds, the Buddha once said, "Just as the sky is not touched by the passing clouds, the mind, in its essence, is untouched by thoughts." In Zen, the true mind is often called the original face, the clear mirror before it was fogged. Thoughts arise like weather, pleasant or painful, bright or stormy, but they are not the sky itself. The mistake we make is to identify with the clouds, to forget that beneath anxiety, beneath grief, beneath distraction, there is stillness. That stillness is not a place, it is not a mood, it is your natural mind, your unshaken awareness. The psychological cloud cover in modern life we rarely see, the sky. Our minds are filled with news, notifications, self-criticism, comparison. We confuse mental weather with identity. I feel worthless becomes I am worthless. I feel anxious becomes I am broken. But in mindfulness-based therapy, we are reminded, thoughts are not facts. Emotions are not permanent. Your mind is not your moods. Your worth is not your worry. Even in the thickest storm, there is sky behind it. Even when we cannot feel peace, peace has not vanished. It waits behind the noise. Healing begins when we stop trying to force the clouds away and instead recognize them as temporary visitors. In both psychology and Buddhism, this shift from identification to observation is everything. We go from I am sad to sadness is here. We reclaim the sky. The dawn. After the cloud on the fourth morning, the clouds parted, not all at once. A sliver here, a thinning there, and then, suddenly, light. Kana ran outside, barefoot in the wet grass, and looked up with wide eyes. The sky was pale blue, quiet and open, as if it had been waiting. Her grandfather stepped beside her, looked up, and bowed. Then he said, "Do not thank the sun for returning. Thank the clouds for reminding you to miss it. So tonight, dear listener, If you feel covered by clouds, if your thoughts are dark, if your mind is restless, if your heart feels far from light, close your eyes. Take a breath. Say quietly, "These are just clouds. They do not define the sky." And let yourself drift back, not to happiness, not to clarity, but to the knowing that beneath it all, you remain whole. You are the sky. The clouds are just passing through. Story 14. The Fisherman and the Silence. The Man on the Lake. There was once a fisherman who stopped fishing. His name was Jiro, and for most of his life, he had risen before the sun, pushed his boat into the vast lake, and cast his net without question. His hands smelled of salt and sun, his eyes sharp from years of watching water. But one morning he didn't cast the net. He just sat. The oars rested across his lap. The lake was glass. The clouds drifted silently across the surface like thoughts, with no urgency. For the first time in decades, Jiro realized he was not listening to the fish, nor the wind, nor the echoes of the world. He was listening to the silence, and it frightened him. The silence that spoke Jiro didn't tell anyone, but day after day he returned to the lake, not to work, but to sit. He told himself he was observing, resting, perhaps ill, but deep down, he knew. Something in him had grown tired of noise. Not just external noise, but the inner tide of constant thinking, judging, comparing. The silence was not empty. It was full of things he had pushed aside for years. Grief, loneliness, the face of his wife, long gone, the sound of his mother's lullaby, long forgotten. It all rose, uninvited, into that stillness. He almost stopped coming. Until one day, an old monk from the nearby temple asked to join him. They sat together in the boat, side by side, saying nothing. As the sun dipped low, the monk finally spoke. "The silence is not punishing you, it's revealing you." 3. Zen and the Soundless. Teaching in Zen, silence is not absence. It is the deepest form of presence. The Buddha himself sat beneath the Bodhi tree not to hear voices or answers, but to enter the silence so fully that all illusion dissolved. 1. Story tells of a student who begged his master for the teaching. The master sat silently. The student grew frustrated, then angry. Finally, he shouted, "Say something!" The master replied, "Until you are willing to hear nothing, you will never hear the truth. Words point, but silence contains." The modern fear of quiet in. The modern world, silence is often mistaken for loneliness. We fill every pause with devices, every commute with podcasts, every waiting moment with stimulation. Even in conversation, we rush to reply, fearing the discomfort of stillness between thoughts. But healing happens in the gaps. Psychologists now call it liminal space, the in-between moment when the old has fallen away, but the new has not yet arrived. Silence is that space, vulnerable, sacred. It's where the nervous system resets, where trauma begins to release, where the soul breathes again, but only if we're willing to stay, to wait through the awkwardness, through the discomfort, through the rising shadows, to sit in the boat without casting the net, to let the silence tell us what the noise could not. The boat that didn't move. Months passed. Jiro fished again, sometimes, but never as before. He now understood the lake was not just a place for labor, it was a mirror, and the silence he once feared had become his friend. The old monk, before leaving, had left him with a final whisper. The most important net you cast is not for fish, it is for truth, and it requires no rope. Now, Jiro rises still before dawn. He rose. He casts. He listens. But he no longer seeks sound. He honors the quiet. The kind of quiet that holds everything he once ran from, and now welcomes like an old companion. So tonight, dear listener, I ask you, when did you last sit in silence, not as absence, but as embrace? What might rise in you if you stopped trying to fill the void? What might soften if you allowed yourself to float, without destination, without noise? Close your eyes. Let your breath be the boat. Let your exhale carry you gently. And listen. The lake is wide. The world is still. The silence is already singing. Story 15. The tea never brewed. The kettle on the fire, in a small temple perched above a river bend. There was a kettle that never boiled. It sat on the same stone stove every morning, flames licking gently beneath it. A practiced ritual passed, down from elder to novice. Tea was made. Guests were served. The sound of boiling was as expected as the bell that marked the hour. But one winter morning, the fire burned, the kettle sat, and the water remained still. Steam rose faintly. The iron warmed, but the water never bubbled. The tea leaves remained untouched in the pot nearby, their fragrance waiting to be released. The monk in charge of the morning preparation, a young man named Ren, grew restless. He added more firewood. He stirred the coals. He even swapped out the kettle twice. Still, no boil. A senior monk passed by and asked softly, "Why the worry?" Ren exhaled in frustration. "I've done everything, but the tea won't brew. It's like something's stuck." The senior monk looked at him gently. "Sometimes," he said, "it is not the kettle that is slow, but the one watching it. Mao, the fire beneath the surface." Ren sat down beside the stove. He watched the flames dance, orange and calm. He looked into the water. Still no bubbles. But it was warm, almost hot. He reached for the kettle, held it with a cloth, and felt the quiet heat. It had been warming slowly, from the bottom up, without spectacle, no steam, no noise, just patient rising. And it dawned on him, perhaps the brewing was not just in the kettle, but in him. How many times in his own practice had he longed for signs, visions, clarity, a moment when awakening would arrive, like a sudden boil, but the truth was slower, softer, subtle as steam he had been heating all along, the zen of slow change. The Buddha never promised fireworks, he promised presence. As a pot fills drop by drop, he said, so too does the wise one fill with peace. In Zen, transformation is not always dramatic. It is not lightning strikes or thunderous insight. It is the slow boil, the invisible warming of the heart, the mind, the breath. The student who sits every day and feels nothing may be closer to awakening than the one who seeks signs. Like the seed beneath the snow, like the moon behind clouds, just because you don't see it doesn't mean it isn't growing. Patience in Zen is not passivity. It is trust in the unseen work. The modern addiction to urgency today, we want everything fast. We brew coffee in seconds. We track our progress. We optimize sleep. We ask mindfulness apps how successful our meditation was. We treat healing like achievement, stillness like failure. But the nervous system does not move on our schedule. The soul does not bloom in quarters or metrics. True healing, whether from grief, trauma, or burnout often happens quietly, slowly, beneath awareness. Therapists call it micro-integration, the invisible stitching together of fractured parts over time. Just because you don't feel better today doesn't mean you're not already healing. The tea is warming, you just can't hear it yet. The scent that finally rose that afternoon, the kettle finally whispered, not a boil, not a whistle, just the soft hiss of readiness. Ren lifted the lid, and a fragrant cloud escaped, subtle, rich, grounding. He poured the water over the waiting leaves, and the room filled with warmth, not just of temperature, but of something else, patience made visible. The senior monk returned, sipping from the cup, and said, "You brewed no tea this morning. The tea brewed you. So tonight, dear listener, if you are waiting for something to happen, a breakthrough, a release, a sign that all of this effort is not in vain, I invite you to trust the quiet warmth, to sit beside your own becoming, to allow the fire to do its work, even if you cannot yet feel the steam. Close your eyes, breathe slowly, and say softly, 'The tea is not late. The moment is arriving.'" Story 16. In the Eyes of a Cat. The cat at the step-sit began with a stare. Every morning at the break of dawn, as the monks prepared for chanting, a small white cat sat on the temple steps, motionless. It did not beg, it did not purr, it simply stared into the courtyard, into the fog, into the hearts of those who happened to glance its way. Some ignored it, some smiled, a few even offered scraps. But one monk, elderly, with a back bent by time and a face softened by silence, sat with it every morning, just for a moment, before entering the zendo. He called her Shiro, though the cat never responded to names. One day, a young monk named Riku asked, "Master, why do you sit with that cat? It teaches nothing." The elder smiled. "She teaches me everything." Riku frowned. "But she just sits there." "Exactly," the elder said. Then he added, "She sees the world without needing it to change." The gaze that stopped time Riku became curious. The next morning, he rose early and sat near the steps. The cat was already there, her tail wrapped neatly around her paws, eyes half-lidded, watching. He watched her. She watched nothing and everything. A leaf fell. Her eyes followed it, not with greed, not with analysis, just attention. A crow called. She turned her head, blinked once, and returned to stillness. There was no hunger in her, no regret, no planning. Riku suddenly realized he had not breathed in several seconds. He exhaled, and in that exhale, a strange calmness arose. He wasn't thinking. He wasn't solving. He was simply there, just like the cat. Zen and the ordinary gaze, the Buddha taught. A wise person sees the extraordinary in the ordinary. Zen expands this truth. It says, "Do not seek the sacred in distant places. Seek it in tea leaves, in broom strokes, in a cat's quiet gaze." This is the heart of Zen, to see things as they are, without judgment, without distortion, without the compulsion to label or improve. Animals, in their own way, are natural Zen masters. They live fully present, without the egoic filter of self-concept. A cat sees a shadow, not as metaphor or omen, but simply as shadow. She does not ask the wind to stop blowing. She does not wish the rain away. She sees, she breathes, she is. And in that, she teaches us what no scripture can. The psychology of pure attention. In modern psychology, this is known as non-evaluative awareness. the capacity to perceive without judging, to observe without reacting. This is not detachment. It is intimacy without interference. In trauma therapy, patients are often invited to return to the body by observing small details, the texture of clothing, the color of the sky, the weight of the hands. Why? Because attention restores regulation. It returns us to the present, to the safety of now, and in Zen, as in therapy, there is no transformation without seeing clearly first. The cat teaches us that we don't always need to do something with what we see. We can let it be, and in that permission comes peace. The final lesson in stillness Riku continued to sit near Shiro every morning. He stopped expecting teachings. He simply arrived. And so did she. Then one day, she was gone. No death, no body, just absence, a cushion of warmth left on the stone step, and paw prints fading in the dew. Riku searched, of course. He asked the villagers. He waited for days. But deep down, he knew. She had taught him what she came to teach. And like all true Zen moments, she left without ceremony. That evening, he lit incense at the step, bowed deeply and whispered, "You showed me the world, as it already was." So tonight, dear listener, I ask you, what might you see if you stopped naming? What softness might return to your gaze if you no longer needed to fix the world? What would it feel like to simply sit and notice? Close your eyes. Let your breath become your seeing. Let your awareness soften and gaze gently into this moment, as if it were looking back. Story 17. The monk who forgot his name. The name that fell away. He arrived at the monastery with nothing. No bag, no robe, no backstory. The only thing he carried was a letter, sealed in red wax and worn at the edges. He handed it to the abbot, without a word, then bowed. The abbot read it slowly, nodded, and gestured toward the garden path. "Your room is ready," he said. "But, may I ask your name?" The man paused. His lips moved slightly. "I don't remember." And he meant it. Not as evasion, not as performance. His name had simply slipped. Later, the monks would whisper about him, how he worked with silent precision, how he bowed with a kind of reverence that came not from habit, but from forgetting who he was supposed to be. They called him Kosi, meaning light without, center. But he never answered to it, not because he was rude, because he had already forgotten that he needed to answer to anything. The garden without labels Kosei tended the temple garden. He never asked what to plant or why. He did not ask which flowers were sacred, which weeds to remove, which path to follow. He touched each leaf with equal care. When asked what his favorite flower was, he blinked and said, "I don't know their names." A novice scoffed. "But how can you cultivate what you don't name?" Kosei smiled. "Because I see what they need." And truly, his garden thrived. The flowers bent toward his touch. The trees seemed to shed less in his presence. Even the stones he arranged carried a certain dignity, as if being seen for the first time. He knew no names, only presence. Zen and the disappearance of identity. The Buddha once said, "In the scene, there is only the scene. In the herd, only the herd. No self, no other, no behind the eyes." In Zen, identity is a useful fiction. Names, titles, histories, they are not evil, but they are containers. And sometimes those containers become cages. The way invites us to see beyond the labels, to experience life directly, without the veil of who we think we are or who we think others should be. Who are you without your name, without your role, without the story you tell yourself each morning? Zen does not ask you to abandon the self. It asks you to let the self become transparent, so the light can pass through. The psychological unraveling of the ego in psychological terms, this process is sometimes called ego dissolution, the loosening of rigid self-identity that allows a person to experience connection, presence, and freedom, not confusion, not loss, spaciousness. Trauma often tightens the self. We cling to identities to survive. I am the strong one. I am the broken one. I am the fixer. These identities protect us, but they also limit us. Healing is the gentle invitation to loosen that grip, to ask, what if I'm more than this name? What if I'm less than this narrative? Mindfulness practices help soften these boundaries. And in that softening, we begin to meet life, not as roles, but as being. The wind that knows. No title Kosei lived at the monastery for years. He never taught a formal Dharma talk. He never claimed lineage. He never sought recognition. And yet, everyone sought him. One winter, the abbot fell ill. The monks gathered and asked Kosei to lead the morning chants. He hesitated. "I don't know the words," he said. "Then sing what's true," the abbot whispered. Kosei stood in the zendo. The incense curled upward, and he sang, not in words, but in breath. Not a performance, but a presence. And every monk, young and old, felt something dissolve in their chest. Later, they asked him what the chant meant. He shrugged, smiled, "I forget," and it was the truest thing they'd ever heard. When the self forgets the self, the Buddha said, only awakening remains. So tonight, dear listener, if you feel overwhelmed by who you're supposed to be, if your name feels too heavy, your roles too rigid, your story too loud, I invite you to forget. Just for a breath, just for a moment. Let go of the label, drop the narrative, and feel what it's like to simply be here. No history, no goal, just the breeze through the garden. Story 18. Rain on the roof of the mind. The storm without thunder. The rain came quietly. No thunder, no lightning. Just a steady tapping, like fingers on paper, on the roof of the meditation hall. The monks did not stir. The sound was not interruption. It was invitation. But for Saku, the youngest novice, the rain was not peace. It was agitation. Each drop felt like a distraction. Each gust of wind stirred something in him. His thoughts raced about his unfinished chores, about the letter from home he never answered, about whether he was really meant to be here. He clenched his jaw. His knees ached. His chest felt tight. The rain wouldn't stop. And inside him, a storm was brewing louder than any sky had ever dared. The master who listened to rain. After the sitting ended, Saku approached the senior monk, Master Kendo, and bowed. "I cannot meditate when it rains," he confessed. "My mind grows louder. My body fidgets. The noise becomes unbearable." Kendo did not respond immediately. He simply looked upward. Then he asked, "Tell me, where is the rain falling?" Saku blinked. "On the roof," Kendo nodded. "And where is your suffering?" Saku hesitated. "In my mind." Kendo smiled. "Then perhaps the problem is not the rain," he said, "but the roof of your mind." He placed a hand on Saku's. shoulder, and added, let the rain in, and it becomes music. Build a roof of resistance, and it becomes noise. 3. The Buddha on the nature of the mind. The Buddha often spoke of the mind as a house. In the Dhammapada, he says, the builder of this house I have seen. You shall build no house again. All your rafters are broken. Your ridgepole is shattered. My mind has reached the unconditioned. But what does this mean? In Zen, we build mental houses, beliefs, preferences, judgments, fears. We place roofs over ourselves in an attempt to stay dry from the rain of life. But these roofs often trap the sound, amplify the echoes, and separate us from reality. The practice is not to silence the rain, it is to remove the ceiling, to let the weather pass through you, not against you. The psychological storm and acceptance. In modern psychology, emotional disturbance is often worsened not by the emotion itself, but by our resistance to it. What we suppress returns stronger. What we fear becomes louder. What we judge begins to own us. This is the foundation of acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT. The idea that peace comes not from controlling our internal experiences, but from opening space for them. Anxious. Let anxiety sit beside you. Sad. Let sadness hold your hand. Angry. Bow to the fire, but do not fan it. The rain on the roof of the mind becomes unbearable only when we try to seal the leaks. But when we allow it in, it becomes the rhythm of healing. The meditation after the storm, that night, Sakhu sat again. The rain returned. He did not resist. He listened, not to silence the noise, but to join it. The patter became a chant. The wind, a bell, the droplets sliding down the walls, a kind of weeping that matched his own soft tears. He smiled. He did not become enlightened. He became present, and that was enough. The next morning, Master Kendo passed him and said, "You heard it, didn't you?" Sakhu nodded. "It wasn't the rain that disturbed me. It was the roof I built against it." "Then let the roof go," Kendo whispered, "and you'll hear the world sing." So tonight, dear listener, if the weather of your mind feels heavy, if worry taps against your ribs like rain, if emotion gathers like grey sky, I invite you to open the roof. Let the rain fall. Let it kiss your breath. Let it baptize the places in you that haven't wept in a long time, and say gently, "This is not a storm. This is a cleansing." Story 19. A candle before dawn. The flame that waited before the birds sang, before the bells rang, before the sun even thought of waking. The hall was already alive, not with voices, not with motion, but with a candle. One candle, placed each, morning by the same old monk, exactly 2 hours before dawn. He never missed a day, not for storms, not for illness, not for grief. The candle was lit in darkness and allowed to burn silently until the light of the world returned. Most monks never questioned it. But one morning, a young visitor to the temple named Toma, restless from travel and unable to sleep, wandered into the meditation hall and saw the flame. He stood in the doorway, unmoving, watching the way the fire bent without breaking, how it breathed as if it too were meditating. Later, he asked the old monk, "Why light a candle when no one is awake to see it?" The monk smiled, eyes soft with dawn's patience. "Because not everything is lit to be seen. Some things are lit. So we remember we are not alone in the dark." The time between times Toma returned the next morning, and the one after. He stopped sleeping through the dark. He stopped waiting for the sky to change before changing his posture, his breath. Instead, he came to sit beside the candle. He noticed something he had never given name to before, the ache of the hour before, light, a quiet sadness that had always lived inside him, a sense of something missing. But here, beside the candle, that ache softened. Not because it disappeared, but because he no longer felt alone in it. The monk called that hour the hush, the time between what was, he said, and what will be. It is sacred, he added, because the world has not yet decided what it will become. Zen and the mystery of transition. In Zen, there is deep reverence for thresholds. Dawn is not just a time, it is a symbol of becoming, of movement, of breath that leads from death to life, from stillness to flow, from not knowing into knowing. But Zen does not rush the passage. It does not ask us to force the light. It teaches us to sit with the candle, to let the dark be exactly what it is. Not a problem, but a space, a cradle, a preparation. In the words of the Buddha, out of darkness, light arises, but the darkness must be seen first. This is the practice, to stop fleeing the dark, to see the candle not as resistance to it, but as accompaniment. The psychology of pre-dawn. Emotion, modern science confirms what monks have always known. The hours before sunrise are when the nervous system is most vulnerable. The brain's serotonin is low. Melatonin still lingers. Emotional pain, especially unresolved grief, feels sharper. The world seems emptier. Psychologists refer to this as the circadian low, a natural dip in energy and clarity, but it is also a window. In trauma therapy, it's called a liminal space, a state where the mind is open, where transformation is more possible than in any other time. It is here, in the quiet before clarity, that we can plant seeds, not by doing, by being present, by lighting a candle and not demanding that it banish the dark, but letting it sit beside us, so we remember we are never alone. The flame that no longer needed to burn weeks passed. Toma kept returning, but one morning the candle was not there. He panicked. Looked for. The old monk searched the drawers, his breath quickened. He had come to rely on that flame. But before the panic became despair, he noticed something. The light was already there, a soft blue in the eastern sky. He smiled. He sat. He waited, not for fire, but for breath. And when the old monk appeared, he asked, "Why didn't you light the candle today?" The monk said, "Because you have become the flame. So tonight, dear listener, if you find yourself awake before the world, if the hour feels too quiet, too vast, too empty, I invite you to light a candle, not to chase the darkness away, but to let it know you are here, you are breathing, you are enough. Close your eyes, let the light flicker in your chest, and say to the silence, even now something glows. Story 20. The gate that opens inward. The gate at the end of the path. At the edge of a high mountain monastery, there was a gate. It stood quietly between two weathered stone walls, its wooden doors faded by sun and storm. Pilgrims called it the East Gate, though few ever used it. Most entered through the main path, broad, clean, carved into the hillside. But the East Gate remained. It was never locked, and yet it rarely opened. One morning, a traveller named Ren came to the monastery. He had walked for many days through crowded cities, then silent forests, then endless ridges of stone. He arrived just before sunrise and found himself standing before the east gate. He knocked. Once. Twice. There was no answer. He tried to open it, but the doors held firm, unmoving, though they were not bolted. Frustrated, he circled around to the main entrance. A monk greeted him kindly, gave him water, and welcomed him in. Still, something in Ren's chest pulsed with restlessness. That gate. Why had it not opened, and why, standing before it, had he felt more exposed than anywhere on his journey? The question with no key. That afternoon, Ren asked the abbot about the east gate. The abbot smiled gently, as if he had been waiting. "Ah," he said. "The one that doesn't open?" Ren nodded. "It's not locked, but it won't move." "Why?" The abbot motioned toward the inner garden. "Let me show you." They walked in silence. At the far corner of the courtyard, they reached a small alcove. There was no gate here, just a simple wooden panel set into the wall with a single inscription. "This gate opens from the inside." Ren looked at the abbot. "That doesn't make sense," he said. "I was on the outside." The abbot bowed slightly. "Exactly." 3. Zen and the inner threshold. Zen is filled with gates. Metaphors of passage, of realization, of awakening. But the truest gates, the ones that matter most, are never physical. They are the thresholds inside us. The gate between thought and awareness. Between fear and trust. Between the self we perform and the self we abandon. The Buddha said, "Within this very body, mortal though it be, is the world, the arising of the world, and the cessation of the world." He did not teach us to look outward, he pointed inward. Because the path to peace does not pass through the gates of temples or teachings. It passes through the small rusted door inside your own chest. And it only opens when you are willing to turn the handle from within. The psychology of inner access in psychotherapy, this same insight emerges again and again. Change cannot be imposed. It must be invited, chosen, allowed. Trauma often teaches us to lock the gate from the inside. We protect ourselves with avoidance, numbness, detachment. The world becomes something we brace against. But healing begins when we gently place a hand on that inner gate. Not to force it open, but to sit beside it, breathe with it, and listen for what lies behind. Therapists call this felt safety, the moment when the nervous system stops guarding and starts trusting. Zen calls it emptiness, not a void, but a space of openness. And once we are ready, we discover the gate is not heavy. It is only our fear that made it seem so. The return to the gate. The next morning, Ren returned to the east gate alone. He stood before it, but this time he did not knock. He sat. He breathed. He closed his eyes, and slowly something shifted, not in the wood, but in him. His jaw softened. His fists loosened. The years of running, proving, hiding, unspooled like threads in the wind. When he opened his eyes, the gate was still closed, but it no longer needed to open, because the passage he had longed for had already begun inside him. Some gates were never meant to move, he whispered, only to be recognized. So tonight, dear listener, if you are standing before a door that won't open, if life feels like waiting for permission, for entry, for change, pause, turn inward. Ask gently, what part of me is waiting to be opened? And can I begin from the inside? Close your eyes. Place a hand on your chest. and listen. There is a gate there, and the key has always been yours. Story 21. The Fox and the Graveyard. The stranger beneath the moon, they said the graveyard was haunted, not with ghosts, not with curses, just presence. Something unspoken in the way the trees leaned too close to the path, the way the wind avoided whistling through certain stones. It wasn't frightening, exactly, but it wasn't empty. One evening, as the moon rose above the silent hillside, a monk named Ishin walked the path alone. He did this once a month, not to chase fear, but to bow to impermanence. The cemetery reminded him that every breath he took had been borrowed, that the faces he passed each day would one day become names carved in stone. On this night, as he reached the western edge of the grounds, he saw a fox, small, red, still. It stood between two graves, staring directly at him, unblinking, unmoving, as if it had been waiting, as if it recognized him. Ishin stopped. He bowed. The fox did not run. The koan of the fox in Zen lore, there is an old story. The white fox koan. A monk once asked Master Baizhang, "Is a person who practices diligently still subject to karma?" The master answered, "No," and for that answer, the monk was reborn as a fox for 500 lifetimes. Later, when he came back in fox form to seek liberation, the master corrected himself. "You must not deny karma," he said, "but you must not be bound by it either." Then the fox was released. It is a strange story, but its meaning is clear. The question is not whether karma is real. The question is how you carry it. Ishin remembered that koan as he stood in the dark, facing the living eyes of an old truth, facing the bones of our story. The fox blinked once, then turned and walked between the graves, not away, but inward. Ishin followed. They passed rows of nameless stones, some broken, some buried in moss. His breath slowed. The silence deepened. He remembered his mother's death. He remembered the lie he once told that cost a friend their dignity. He remembered the kindness he never repaid, the child he once was, the self he tried to forget. The fox stopped at a flat, unmarked stone. It sat down. Ishin understood. This was the grave of what he had not yet faced. He knelt, his knees pressing into damp earth. He didn't chant. He didn't apologize. He simply breathed. And in that breath, he no longer resisted his story. Zen and the freedom of returning. The Buddha taught, whatever arises, see it. Whatever passes, release it. This is the way. In Zen, the graveyard is not just a place of endings. It is a place of completion. We are not asked to forget the past. We are asked to see it without flinching, to turn and face the shadow, not to destroy it, but to reclaim the part of us still buried there. We all carry unmarked graves inside, unspoken regrets, unfelt grief, unlived truths. But Zen reminds us, no part of you is beyond forgiveness, not even the part still pretending to be a fox. The walk back without running as dawn softened the edges of the stone. Ishin stood. The fox was gone. No rustle, no farewell, just absence. But something in him felt lighter, not because he had escaped anything, but because he had finally stopped trying to. He walked back through the graveyard slowly. He did not avoid any names. He bowed at the gates, and when asked later why he went, he said, to sit with what still lives in me, and to stop fearing the place I left it. So tonight, dear listener, If a shadow visits, if something buried begins to stir, a guilt, a memory, a regret, do not turn away. Sit beside it. Breathe with it. Let the fox lead you. You may find that what you feared was not the ghost of your past, but the part of you that still longs to be welcomed home. Story 22. Pebbles in the stream. The child at the water's edge. In a quiet valley between two long-forgotten mountains, there ran a stream. It was not large. It did not roar like rivers or leap like waterfalls. It simply moved, endlessly, effortlessly, over stones worn smooth by time and silence. Each afternoon, a child named Toma came to sit at the edge of the stream. He did not bring toys. He did not bring friends. He brought thoughts, the kind that were too big for his age and too quiet for adults to notice. His parents were often busy. His teachers were often rushed. But the stream listened. Toma would pick up a pebble, smooth, round, no sharper than a sigh, and watch it roll through his palm. Then, with care, he would toss it into the water and listen for the plunk. The splash never lasted, but the feeling did. He imagined that each pebble was a thought he no longer needed, a question without an answer, a sadness without a name, and with each one, he let go. The monk who counted stones. One day, a monk from a nearby hermitage passed by and saw the boy at the water. He watched silently as Toma picked up another pebble, turned it in his fingers, and let it fall into the stream. The monk stepped closer. "What are you doing?" he asked softly. Toma looked up, surprised. "I'm putting my heavy thoughts in the water," he said. The monk nodded, sat down beside him. "Have they become lighter?" he asked. Toma shrugged. "I don't know, but they don't feel so loud." The monk picked up a stone and held it to the light. "This pebble," he said, "used to be sharp, but the stream has made it round." Toma blinked. The monk smiled. "Let your mind be like the stream. It does not judge the stone. It only carries it until it becomes smooth." 3. The Dharma of flow and form. The Buddha taught, all things are like a dream, a bubble, a shadow. Let go, and you will be free. But what does it mean to let go? In Zen, letting go is not forgetting. It is carrying lightly what once weighed heavily. Thoughts will come. Emotions will rise. But the practice is not to suppress them. It is to place them gently in the stream of awareness and let time, soft and kind, wear them smooth. We cannot rush this. We cannot demand clarity on a schedule. Like the stream, transformation takes its shape not through force, but through persistence, drop by drop, pebble by pebble, day by day. The psychology of emotional flow-in. Modern therapy, especially somatic and trauma-informed practices, there is deep respect for the body's natural rhythm of release. Emotions, grief, fear, shame, are not enemies. They are messengers. And when we allow them to pass through, like water, they soften. But when we resist them, they harden. They become jagged. They sit in the streambed of our nervous system, catching every new current. We feel stuck, reactive, heavy. Healing is not always a breakthrough. Sometimes it's a slow erosion of the sharp edges, a kindness to the part of you that's been holding too tightly. The practice is simple. Name what hurts. Place it in the stream. Let it move. Let it change. The stone that stayed Toma grew. The stream remained. Years later he returned, not as a child but as a young man, weary from the weight of adult life. He sat where he once did, by the water, He found a pebble, not large, but familiar, and without a word, he placed it in the stream. It didn't make a sound this time, but it carried something with it, not pain, but permission, to feel, to soften, to be carried. "I cannot fix everything," he whispered, "but I can. Let it pass." So tonight, dear listener, if you are holding something sharp, a memory, a fear, a story that no longer fits, find your stream. Maybe it's your breath. Maybe it's this moment. Maybe it's the quiet between two thoughts. Place your pebble there and let it be changed, not by force, but by the gentle truth that all things soften in time. Story 23. The Hermit's Bowl. The man who carried nothing. They called him a hermit, but no one ever asked his name. He lived alone in a cave just above the tree line, where the air turned sharp and birds forgot how to sing. The path to his dwelling was overgrown, and most villagers had long stopped trying to follow it. But every so often, someone climbed, not for answers, but for the silence that surrounded him. He had only one possession, a wooden bowl, carved long ago from a single piece of camphor wood, smoothed by time and use. He used it for rice, for tea, for collecting rain, for listening to wind. When he walked, barefoot, always, it hung from his sash, knocking gently against his hip like a bell with no sound. One summer evening, a weary traveller found him sitting on a flat stone outside the cave, the bowl beside him, catching the light. "I've lost everything," the traveller said. "Family, home, name. There's nothing left." The hermit looked at the bowl. "Good," he said. "Now you can begin." The bowl that held everything. The traveller stared at the bowl. "It's just a cup," he said. The hermit smiled. "It's more than that, and less." He lifted it gently, cradling it in both hands. "This bowl holds rice," he said, "but also hunger. It holds tea, but also breath. It holds rain, sunlight, stories, silence. And when I'm gone, it will hold nothing." He placed the bowl back on the stone, and that too is a kind of fullness. The traveller frowned. "I don't understand." "You will," the hermit said, "when you stop needing to." 3. The Buddha and the Empty Hand. The Buddha once said, "The gift of nothing is still a gift." In Zen, the bowl is not just a utensil, it is a symbol of simplicity, humility, receptivity. Monks are taught to treat their bowl as sacred because it reflects the mind itself, open, empty, ready to receive, not grasping, not clinging, simply available. This is the essence of Zen practice, to walk through life not as one who accumulates, but as one who receives, each moment like rice in a bowl, nothing wasted, nothing hoarded. When we release attachment, we discover emptiness is not poverty, it is space for presence. The modern myth of more, we live in a world obsessed with accumulation. More knowledge, more control, more tools to fix what hurts. Even our healing becomes cluttered. Journals, courses, checklists, stacks of unread wisdom, but Zen teaches. The bowl is already full when it is willing to be empty. Psychologists speak of cognitive overload, emotional fatigue, and the paradox of choice. Too many paths, too many goals, too much. But stillness doesn't come from having more. It comes from holding less, and holding what we do have with care. To sit with just a bowl, just this moment, just enough. The gift left behind, the next morning, the traveller prepared to descend the mountain. He had not been given teachings, No mantras, no instructions. But before he left, the hermit held out the bowl. "For you," he said. The traveller stepped back. "I can't." The hermit nodded. "Then don't take it. Let it be yours anyway." He set the bowl down on a stone and turned back toward his cave. The traveller stared at it for a long time. He did not lift it. He did not fill it. He only bowed and walked away with emptier hands and a quieter heart. The world cannot pour peace into full hands, he whispered to himself, but it always finds space in the empty ones. So tonight, dear listener, if you feel overwhelmed, if your life feels too crowded, too noisy, too much, I invite you to pause. Place your palms together and imagine a single bowl. No past, no future, only this space, only this readiness. Let it hold your grief. Let it hold your breath. Let it hold nothing. And discover in that emptiness everything that has been waiting for you. Story 24. The laugh of the old nun. The one who laughed too much, in a temple known for its silence. There was once an old nun who laughed, not politely, not occasionally, but freely. Her name was Sowen. Her robe was always just a little wrinkled, her chants a touch out of rhythm, and her presence, like sunshine on a wall that had never known warmth. When she laughed, some monks frowned, some smiled, some simply paused, unsure if reverence allowed such sound, but none could ignore her. Sowen swept the garden like a woman dancing. She bowed as if she were greeting an old joke. And in the hall of formal meditation, she once giggled so loudly during sitting practice that 3 novices broke into tears, not from amusement, but from something softer they didn't know how to name. When asked why she laughed so much, she only said, "Because I finally stopped arguing with life." The quiet behind her smile. Sowen hadn't always laughed. Once she had been silent, a respected teacher, a scholar of the suttas, fluent in metaphor and restraint. She had followed every rule, recited every verse, memorized every koan, but it hadn't saved her from heartbreak, the death of a sister, the betrayal of a student, the quiet suffering of insomnia that no chant could soothe. She had grown heavy with discipline. Her practice became armor, until one morning during her daily tea, she dropped the cup. It shattered, not loudly, but precisely. She stared at the pieces. Something inside her cracked. Then, unexpectedly, she laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was true. The cup had broken, the tea had spilled, and nothing, no sutra, no schedule, no solemnity could put it back together. So she laughed. And, in that laughter, she began to live again. Zen and the release of form in the Platform Sutra, Huineng taught. When your mind is free, you laugh. When your heart is still, the world is not so serious. Zen does not worship solemnity, it worships truth, and sometimes truth comes dressed not in robes, but in absurdity, in the perfect imperfection of things breaking, failing, falling apart. Sowen's laughter was not rejection of suffering, it was acceptance of its dance. She did not deny sorrow, she simply stopped pretending it had to wear a mask. In Zen, this is freedom, not the absence of difficulty, but the release of the belief that it should be otherwise. To laugh not at pain, but through it. To smile not to cover grief, but because grief no longer needs to be hidden. The psychology of joyful defiance. In modern trauma therapy, this moment is recognized. A moment when the client, mid-tears, begins to chuckle, not from mockery, but from realization, from the absurdity of having tried so hard, for so long, to control what could never be tamed. Psychologists call this cognitive shift, a reframing of experience, a widening of perspective. It's the nervous system exhaling for the first time. It's the inner child saying, "You don't need to fight anymore." It's a sacred kind of laughter, not of escape, but of surrender. And when it comes, healing follows like light through a cracked door. The bell that rang for no reason. Years later, when Soen was nearing the end of her life, she asked for no ceremony. "No incense," she said. "No chanting. Just let the garden be messy." But the night she passed, the temple bell rang. Once, though no one had pulled the rope. Monks gathered in silence. Then one novice, without meaning to, laughed. It was not disrespectful. It was false. If Soen herself had returned, not as a ghost, but as a reminder. Do not take the path too seriously. You are already walking it. So tonight, dear listener, if you feel burdened by the weight of becoming, if your practice has become performance, your healing too stiff, your breath too tight, I invite you to laugh, not because life is easy, but because something in you has already survived. Close your eyes, place a hand on your chest, and whisper, "It's okay. Even this is part of it." Then smile, gently, foolishly, completely. Let joy be your teacher. Let your next exhale be the sound of a cup breaking and a soul remembering it was never meant to be whole. Story 25. Returning to the mountain. The road back. He had been gone for 30 years. His name was once Kaito, a monk who left the mountain long ago in search of something he could never quite name. He had bowed to masters, crossed deserts, studied scriptures in 3 languages, and sat under trees in cities where no one knew what stillness meant. He had chased awakening the way some chase wealth, with quiet desperation. And now, older, slower, he climbed the same trail he had once, descended. The monastery was smaller than he remembered, the steps more crooked, the walls thinner, but the wind was exactly the same. He reached the gate, paused, then stepped through. No one greeted him, and that, somehow, felt right. The room that had waited, his old quarters, were still there, empty, dusted by time. A cracked cup rested on the window ledge. A mat sat folded in the corner. A scroll hung crooked on the wall, its ink faded but readable. Before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, the same. Kaito sat. He didn't chant. He didn't unpack. He simply placed his hand on the old floorboards and wept. Not from sadness, but from recognition. All the years of seeking, all the miles, all the teachings, and here it was. The truth he had longed for, living quietly in the place he had once been too young to see. He hadn't returned to the mountain. He had returned to himself. The Zen of completion. In Zen, the journey is not linear. It is a circle. You leave not to escape, but to deepen. You return not to reclaim, but to integrate. The Buddha left home, found suffering, found awakening, and then returned. Not to be a prince, but to walk barefoot through the world, showing others that the path leads back in. The mountain is not a location, it is a metaphor. It is the place you carry inside, even while wandering. It is the center you forget, and then remember. And the return, that is not the end. It is the beginning, seen with new eyes. The psychology of wholeness. In trauma healing and self-discovery, there comes a moment, quiet, often unannounced, when the client stops trying to fix themselves, not because they've given up, but because they finally understand they were never broken. The spiral of healing brings them back to the same memories, the same patterns, but this time with love, with presence, with gentleness. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, and that becoming often looks like returning to the child you once were, to the breath you forgot, to the home within your own skin. You leave, you search, you strive. Then one day you sit on an old floor and realize you're already here." The silence that greeted him. The next morning, the monks found Kaito sweeping the steps. He bowed to them as if he had never left. He said no words of wisdom. He gave no sermons. He simply moved as if the ground itself was sacred. Later that week, a young monk asked him, "Master, why did you come back?" Kaito smiled. "Because the mountain never moved," he said. "Only I did." Then he added, as if to himself, "It waited without needing me. And still, it welcomed me." So tonight, dear listener, if you feel far from peace, if you've wandered too long, followed too many paths, carried too many teachings, I invite you to return, not to the past, not to the person you used to be, but to the mountain inside you, the breath that asks for nothing, the moment that holds everything. Sit, just sit. Place your hand on the ground beneath you and say, "I have arrived." Dear traveler, if you've stayed with us this far, if you've walked these quiet paths, sat by these still waters, breathed with us through each story, then you already know. This was never just a collection of words. It was a return, a remembering. Soft hand reaching for yours across the silence. We hope these 25 stories offered more than reflection. We hope they became companions, not to guide you forward, but to sit beside you, right here, right now. If something in you softened, if a weight lifted, if even one breath felt deeper than before, let us know. Your reflections matter. Your voice belongs here. Leave us a comment. Share your favorite story. Tell us how it found you, or how you found it. And if these gentle currents nourished you in any way, please consider sharing this journey with someone who may be drifting. Subscribe to The Empty Boat, where we continue to float through the great silence together, not to arrive, but to remain awake. Thank you for being here. May you be well. May you be whole, and may you always remember you are already home.